All right. Hello and welcome everybody to our monthly Cannabis Lab chapter meeting. I am glad that all of you can make it. I am sorry that we are not down there at American Social with you. There was a little bit of logistic issues with the storm coming and everything else, but I hope you all are there. I hope you're all networking and having a great time. And again, sorry that we couldn't be with you today. We've got an absolutely great presentation for you. This is weeding through Florida's second round of cannabis licensing. This is something we've all been waiting for a very long time and are super excited to hear about. So of course we have to go to our resident expert on all things Florida to put together an amazing panel for us. Before I introduce him, thank you, Kenzie, I'll be right back. Before I introduce him, I want to thank tonight's sponsors, Box Rothschild, Miracle Leaf, Canna Curious Magazine, and of course, American Social. So if you're watching this in American Social, please give me a big round of applause for our sponsors tonight. If you see them at the event, definitely thank them. So as I said, if we're going to focus on all things Florida, of course, we got to bring in our resident expert, Vijay Choksi. So Vijay, I will go ahead because I know you built this panel. I know you've been waiting to talk about this and turn it over to you. Thank you for taking over, Vijay. On mute.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you for that introduction, Todd. Appreciate it. And again, apologies for not being able to be there in person and shake hands and see everyone over there at AMSO. But nonetheless, I am very excited because today we have a round of experts, all from their respective divisions, to talk about and come together to talk about Florida's next round of cannabis licensing. Since its inception about 6.5 years ago, Florida's medical marijuana market is booming. And that honestly has been growing to become one of the nation's leading states for operators trying to get into that. And, quite honestly, although it's all an attractive market, it does have its unique sense of challenges. It's very capital intensive in Florida. And to build out a competitive, vertically integrated operation, let alone one that is actually competitive, requires strategic planning. And what I have with me here today are some of those experts who can kind of guide that strategic planning for you. Let's go ahead and I guess, I'll just name off some names and we'll go one by one. So first off, David Bunzel. David is Managing Director of Investment Banking and M&A and Public and Private Markets with Young American Capital, LLC. David, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Young American Capital?
Sure. Thanks, Vijay. Hello, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be down in sunny, warm Florida. Well, I hope it is up in New York. As Vijay mentioned, we are a 70-person investment bank. We're located in Mamaroneck, New York. We operate across multiple verticals, with cannabis probably being our largest vertical. We have 15 people on a full-time cannabis team. I run M&A, and we have 2 co-heads of the group, and between the 15 of us, we consider ourselves at the kind of the center of the cannabis universe. We've done about 30 or 35 transactions in the cannabis space over the last 2.5 years. We do everything from small equity raises and debt deals all the way up to large M&A. And we've done multiple transactions in Florida. We've handled 4 of the MSO M&A transactions that have occurred in the state in the last 2 or 3 years. And we're actively involved with a number of the current MMTCs, helping them with real estate, capital, advisory. And we have expertise across the country in just about every legal cannabis state. I tend to focus, along with my partner, on the Northeast and Southeast, and that's my specialty.
Appreciate that, David. Next up, we have Cesar Estrada, partner with Markham LLP. Cesar is a CPA and serves in Markham's Tax and Business Services Division. Cesar, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Markham? You're on mute, Cesar.
Yes, thanks, Vijay. Good evening, everyone. As Vijay mentioned, my name is Cesar Estrada, and I'm a tax partner At Markham LLP, we're a national CPA firm. I am both a certified public accountant and an enrolled agent. My clientele includes startup companies, closely held businesses, and publicly traded corporations. Throughout my career, I have helped clients with tax compliance, tax due diligence, structuring, consulting on various matters, and representation before the IRS and local taxing authorities. I also spent a significant portion of my time assisting clients with their income tax provisions under US GAAP and IFRS. It is a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Caesar. Appreciate that. And then up next, we have Elizabeth, but we call her Liz for short. Liz Godinez, who serves as a all-star broker with Hub International. Liz, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and Hub?
Of course. Thank you, Vijay. Good evening, everyone. So happy to be here with you all today. I am a producer here at Hub International. We are one of the largest insurance agencies in the nation. We have a dedicated team to cannabis. We specialize in risk management and compliance as well. We are a very large national company. I've been with our agency for 15 years now, and I am one of the leaders in the emerging market and risk management here at the Hub South Florida office. Thank you.
Awesome. So, I don't think Todd kind of mentioned, where I work, but I work over here at Fox Rothschild. Fox Rothschild is AM 200 firm, about 1,000 attorneys. There's about 90 attorneys who are solely dedicated or fall within the cannabis practice group. I myself only deal with cannabis matters throughout the country. Fox has a robust team. We have practices ranging from single state operators all the way to multi-state operators and auxiliary companies, all within the cannabis space. And, just for housekeeping purposes, so I can speak a little candidly here, being an attorney for this panel, I am not providing any legal advice, and my comments and remarks that I'm going to say here are not a reflection of the views of Fox Rothschild. Some additional housekeeping. If you have any questions and you're online, please, we will reserve some time at the end. So please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll get to it at the end. If you're there live in person, I'm sure Rob Friedman is over there. You can tell your question to Rob, and Rob can kind of shoot out those questions at the end as well. So with that, let's kind of go ahead and get started. We have a lot to unpack tonight. So I think one of the largest obstacles that I hear people who are trying to get into the cannabis space in Florida is no stranger to this is, how do you have that access to capital? Florida being vertically integrated, you have to do all facets of supply chain. So essentially you're 5, 6, 7, 8 businesses in one, just with one piece of paper license. So with that, David, I kind of wanted to ask you, what are the steps for companies to get financing or applicants to get financing? And how do we raise capital given just the current market conditions right now?
Well, the easiest way is to start with a lot of capital. And for those of us that aren't lucky enough to start with that much capital, you have to rely on what can be some very difficult and challenging markets, especially right now. Since you are pre-license, the first step is to raise enough money to get through the licensing process successfully. And that chase capital can cost anywhere from, well, there's an application fee, which is quite substantial, and let Vijay go into some of the particulars about that, but there's also quite a bit of legal, a lot of application writing, and actually reserving enough for what is inevitably the litigation that is going to come with this round. So I think you need to budget anywhere from $1 million to $2 million of chase capital by itself. And then on top of that, you've got to raise whatever it's going to cost to build out your footprint when you're successful. One key that I think is making a decision to control your real estate right away, pre-application. So that's only going to add to your carrying costs. And so only raising what you have to come up with. There are multiple places to go for capital, everything from debt to equity. It's a very difficult environment to do both. So I think skin in the game as a principal is the biggest positive factor, and starting with a decent commitment from the principals and having a good war chest to get through the chase part would be my opening comment on that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, David. And I think you touched on it. It's really hard to raise this capital in this current market, just given where everything is. And I think, you know, a lot of the mistakes that happened, at least that what I've seen from people who are new to investing in cannabis and, you know, are interested in kind of funding an application or even an operation, is that they really underestimate the capital intensiveness that are really needed to make a license application competitive, let alone fully operational in this vertically integrated market. And a big portion of that kind of goes into real estate. You know, so with that, I kind of wanted to toss it over to Liz. You know, Liz, Florida is very retail heavy. There's no limit on the number of dispensaries operators can open up. I think by last account, it's just a little shy of 500 dispensaries throughout the state. So retail being a critical component and part of the application, what should applicants consider, you know, when evaluating sites and what have you?
Yes, Vijay, that's a great question. Yeah, here in Florida, the biggest factor, definitely the driver of premiums, is the property insurance market, the hurricane specifically. So if you're looking at where you're going to set up shop, anything coastal is going to be a big, you know, it's going to be large premiums. Also, the type of building you're in, the more secure the building, the better. If it's new construction, if it has impact windows, you know, those are the type of things that carriers are looking at. Vaults, obviously, if you're carrying personal property, where are you storing that? What's the value of that personal property that you're going to be storing in there? Those are all important, you know, property factors that they look at, but definitely where it's going to be located, coastal is going to be the most expensive right now with all these storms hitting. It's really where you got to invest your time in looking at these policies is pretty much the property policy here.
Awesome. Okay. So, you know, I guess when we talk about risk, there's a lot of coverages that are kind of come into play that, you know, applicants kind of need to consider, right? So, you know, we spoke about just like real estate, property, but, you know, are there any other types of insurance coverages, you know, just coming off my mind, does like cyber insurance policies come into play? Should people be thinking about that? What about just like general liability or E&O?
Yeah, the basic insurances that all these vertically integrated companies here in Florida need to have definitely is general liability, product liability, especially since they're going to be the manufacturer and the cultivators as well. Workers' comp. If you have more than 3 employees, you have to have workers' comp coverage. If you're in the scale of 10 to 15 employees, I always recommend EPLI. I recommend it even if you have a few, but, you know, typically 10 to 15 or more employees, we look at EPLI. If it's publicly traded DNOs, even if you have capital that you've raised outside, it's important to have some DNO, directors and officers coverage. And you know, like the property coverage as well. So really depending on the license that they hold, in which in Florida, you're vertically integrated, so you have to pretty much hold all the licenses, you're gonna wanna make sure you cover the entire operations. This is a risk management, the way we look at it. So even if you're doing transportation, if you have cargo that you're transporting it as well. So it's really all lines of business would apply here in Florida. But yeah, and also for the licensing requirement, you need to have a bond. In Florida, it's one of the highest bonds. I think it's, if not the highest in the nation, as far as you need to have 5 million in Florida for a bond. So they're not just giving out $5 million bonds to any, you know, new venture. It has to be an established, you know, financials, audited financials they're looking at as well, personal financials. And the premiums are you're looking at about 1% of the bond amount, and they're looking at maybe a 2-year plan, if I'm not mistaken. So it's in the 100,000 range. So like David said, you have to have a certain amount of capital to be able to even obtain that bond.
So I guess just like talking about the capital and the bond and certified financials, I kind of wanted to toss it over to you, Caesar. In terms of, I guess, from your vantage point, what should cannabis companies be doing right now so they could actually prepare to put forth a competitive application?
Sure. Well, there's a few, I guess, sections that, from my perspective as an accountant, I would focus on. One, you have to have certified financial statements. Those financial statements have to be prepared in accordance with US GAAP, and they have to be audited in accordance with US GAAP, which are the generally accepted auditing standards. And they have to be audited by an independent accounting firm. Also, another thing that companies will have to do is describe how they're going to obtain the funding that they need to implement the cultivation, the processing, the dispensing, their accountability plan. And finally, they have to work on a projected budget for the first 2 years after licensure. This budget, the projected budget, has to be consistent with the plan. So, I mean, these are all things that they can be working on, and they're all things that they would have to work with an accountant on. They could certainly assist with all of these 3 items.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned the budget. I guess when applicants put forth an initial budget, they should probably be prepared to double it. Just being that there's a lot of money to be spent here. In terms of, I guess, building that team, you would need an accountant. Of course, you would need financial advisor, as well as a producer, broker, as well as an investment bank to go ahead and get this capital. And of course, attorneys are all around in terms of Florida cannabis and cannabis in general. But there are other types of personnel that we also need to consider, from consultants to architects to engineers. And I think part of that goes towards who are you retaining to put forth that competitive application. When we look at the application, it's not really out yet. All we have to go based off of is what Florida released when they issued that Black Farmer license application instructions. So it was segmented in a points-based system. There was a lot of requirements concerning what needed to be put forth for these Black Farmer applicants. Part of that kind of touches on your cultivation plan and infrastructure, your dispensing plan and infrastructure, processing plan and infrastructure, as well as your IT, security. How do you go ahead and build all that out? And what infrastructure do you have already versus what you plan on acquiring? And that kind of puts the difference in terms of your competitive application, how many points you can get. If you can hit the points concerning what you have already. And a lot of that is very capital intensive. Of course, you won't be able to purchase outright and become the owner of 15 different retail sites, but you could probably supplement some of those with some letters of intent or LOIs. In addition to that, it's preparing that infrastructure, right? So I mentioned architects and engineers. Do you have that build out blueprint plan? Do you have them on retainer? Because essentially when you're building that budget, you're going to have to account for all of those line items to ensure to the regulators here, Office of Medical Marijuana Use, that you've accounted for this. Because what they want to see is that you prepared, you did your due diligence, and you actually have money in the bank. And I guess just going towards just money in the bank, David, what type of documentation would an applicant need to prove to OMU or the Department of Health just to, I guess, show an evidence of their money in the bank, but also their ability to source additional funding? Any insight?
Well, first, what you mentioned all the professionals that would be helpful in this process. I think first of all, medical directors, there's a huge medical director section and points for that. But even taking a further step backwards, there's a whole industry of cottage industry type of writer you are and how good of a writer you are. It's easy to network and find really good application writers who have been successful in the past in assisting either successful applicants in Florida or other states. And it's not rocket science. I highly suggest you read the application and how it's scored. It's all right there in front of you, and following those directions and knowing what you get points for is it sounds kind of basic and easy, but a lot of people don't read or don't answer the question, and spend a whole lot of time talking about things that you don't get points for. So those are all, I think, to touch on the beginning part of your question. In terms of documentation, I mean, you should be working with your accountant to show proof of funds, and we keep coming back to money. The more funds that you can show, that you can execute, not only on what your plan is, but beyond that. As we said, Florida is a vertical market. There's no wholesale market. You've got to grow everything that you sell. And so it's an expensive build out. And real estate, Liz touched on real estate. You can spend, first of all, you do get points in the application for control of real estate. So it's a huge part of your application process. But I think the opportunity in Florida, just thinking long term, almost every dispensary in Florida is not built for rec. They're small, very similar footprints. They're 2,500 square feet, 3,500 square feet, cookie cutter buildings. So I personally, I'd be thinking about my real estate and really trying to position it for a rec market. It's more expensive to do this, but for instance, thinking about larger footprints for your dispensaries. Instead of going after a cookie cutter, you go for maybe larger dispensaries and less of them. And these are some of the ways that I think you can differentiate, and then just making sure that you have enough capital in the beginning to get all the way through the process. I think is really huge.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you also touch on a fantastic point with just the personnel, the application writer. A lot of people think that, okay, I hire a law firm, they're going to write the application. Yes, we could write the application, but it's going to be very cost prohibitive for me to write the application. Essentially you would just go to, these application writers that I'm sure all of us have a network of application writers that we all use and trust and have worked with. So it's really just building that core team in terms of, helping you get your ball rolling when you're putting forth an application. And I think we touched on it a little earlier, just the initial cost, to put forth the black farmer license application fee was, 6 figures. It was like 146, 150, somewhere around there just for the fee alone. Now, mind you, for those 11 that did not receive a license, then litigation is going to determine whether or not they eventually do. But for those who don't, they would theoretically be able to transfer over to the second batch of licensing, which we're talking about right now. And
they haven't set the fee for the second. So
no,
I've heard rumors of like 250K. I mean, like that, it's kind of crazy, but so
yeah.
it's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, DeSantis wants, the operators to pay. He realizes this is big business, and we should be paying taxes and fees. So, I mean, if he wants to set up a regulatory regime associated with that, then, that'll be fantastic. Seeing that he won a few days ago, let's see what ensues. In terms of, what you brought up though, reading the application, although it's not out yet, I think we have a very good framework to work from. from that black farmer application. And essentially, that application really lays out in intricate detail of what OMU or the Department of Health wants to see. It's very straightforward. It breaks it down into about 9 sections or so. There's subsections associated with the general section. Each section is worth about 200 points for a total of 1,800 raw points. And those points are weighted differently. So theoretically, if you were to get 100%, you would walk away with a score of 3,500 points. If we look at the previous black farmer round, the winning license had around 3,100 points. The highest scored applicant had 3,156. The lowest scored applicant had 985. I mean, that's a big discrepancy. So, it really just shows you to allocate your resources to really flesh out those plans, because that's what OMU wants to see, are those plans on how you plan on operating within those first 2 years, and the budget, whether or not that budget is secured, whether or not your infrastructure is secured, all of that. So I guess, Liz, I kind of wanted to toss it over to you, and feel free, anyone else who wants to chime in. But, when people are thinking about just, I guess, employees and building their team, there's a lot of turnover in cannabis, but there's also a lot of talent. So, if you found that personnel, if you found that individual, what can operators do to kind of keep them to stay? What are some things that you've seen on your perspective in terms of personnel?
Thank you, Vijay. Yeah, in terms of personnel, they're looking at, job security, 401k, benefits, employee benefits, life insurance, work-life balance, all these things that come into play. Definitely having an employee benefits package, one that's really well-rounded, things that the employees are looking for, is very important in order to keep them satisfied and keep them around for a while. The hub actually has an employee benefits captive. It's a cannabis benefits captive, and they do a great job, throwing in all these perks and different incentives and nice medical insurance plans, 401ks, accidental insurance, health savings accounts, different things that this generation and these employees are looking for, and other companies, are offering as well. And now, cannabis is so new, and it's only been around for a couple of years. So all of these are ever changing. All these policies are ever changing. There's different players coming in, different carriers. All the carriers are very niche. They all want to look at different things. So where I would send an MMTC would be, a vertically integrated company. I can send it to a carrier that just does that, versus carriers that do just small stuff. So, we have access to many different carriers, MGAs. We have our own carrier, SafeHerb. So, employee benefits is one of those things that you really have to keep these employees happy.
Yeah, appreciate that, Liz. Cesar, I guess just piggybacking off of what Liz just said, it's kind of building that entire package, ensuring that you have the personnel that you could attach to your license, and they actually would be proud to be attached to your license to bolster that up. I've seen a lot of operators or potential operators kind of overlook that aspect, and I would consider that a pitfall. From your vantage point, your perspective, what are some pitfalls that you've seen cannabis companies make for potential applicants?
Sure. There's quite a bit of them. We could spend quite a bit of time discussing those, but there's a few I'd like to point out, which I would say are probably more prevalent, if you will. First of all, one pitfall that I've seen is taking aggressive tax positions. Certain companies get too aggressive in their quest to circumvent Code Section 280E. If these positions result in a material change to the company's income tax liability, and the company set up as a corporation, They're usually identified during the financial statement audit process and require a reserve and disclosure on the financial statements. In many cases, they also require a disclosure on the tax return, where you're basically putting the IRS on notice and letting them know what these aggressive positions are. State tax adjustments are another pitfall. Even if cannabis is legal at the state level, Section 280E may still apply. Florida is an example of this. The federal taxable income is the starting point for computing state taxable income. Currently, Florida follows the federal law, so you cannot make an adjustment at the state level to allow deductions that are disallowed at the federal level as a result of Code Section 280E. And speaking of state issues, make sure that you are making your Florida extension payments on time. If you're filing a tax return extension in Florida, keep in mind that this provides an extension of time to file and not an extension of time to pay. Florida is a strict state when it comes to this, and if you do not pay the taxes due with the extension will be invalidated. As such, you will be subject to penalties. Foreign disclosures are another item to watch out for. If you have operations overseas, there may be additional filing requirements and disclosures with your U.S. tax return. Failing to include these disclosures, even if they're informational, may result in hefty penalties. Just to name a few, you have Form 5471, Form 926, and even FBAR disclosures. Make sure you're not taking bonus depreciation. That is a common misconception in the cannabis world. Cannabis companies cannot benefit from bonus depreciation. They must follow the rules under Code Section 471, which generally follows similar depreciation methods as those used for U.S. GAAP purposes. If you're a partnership with foreign partners, don't forget about withholding payments. Such withholding is required on income allocable to foreign partners and must be remitted to the IRS on a quarterly basis. Finally, something that's oftentimes overlooked, don't forget to file Form 8300. Businesses that transact in cash need to strongly consider creating an internal policy that ensures that Form 8300 is filed as required. This form is required if you receive more than $10,000 in cash in a single transaction or in related transactions. The form must be filed by the 15th day after the date the cash transaction occurred.
Thanks, Caesar. You did touch on something that I kind of wanted to just dive into, in terms of I guess the actual filings of documents. Is this something that Markham and yourself can kind of outline and help with? And at what point of the process should someone actually engage you? Should that be, after they submit the application? Should that be a little prior to? Do you help with, making these budgets? Like, what would be the opportune time for someone to get someone like you or Markham involved?
Sure. It really depends, Vijay, on the client and the resources that they already have. To answer your question, as far as like when to get us engaged, we have clients that get us engaged at different steps of the process. Definitely, we need to get engaged to assist with the financial statement audit. But there are all these things I just mentioned we can help with. It really just becomes a matter of what the internal resources are. Just to give you an example, some of the current clients that I have in the cannabis space, some of them have their own accounting teams, their internal accounting team. So we serve more as their consultants when there are issues that come up that are more consulting in nature, that perhaps are beyond what can be handled in-house. But then there are some that don't necessarily have that internal team. So we get involved with everything, such as assisting with putting together their income tax provision disclosures for their audit, if somebody else is doing the audit. We get involved with, when it comes to their compliance, everything that has to do with their tax filings, so their income tax filings, their sales tax also. They have, they need assistance with sales tax. That's something that we do. All of these foreign disclosures that I mentioned, we can involve with as well. And we also assist in helping them put together systems and controls in place to ensure that some of these forms, like the 8300 that I mentioned, that the systems are working in order to identify transactions that would need reporting, that the reporting is done timely. So it really depends on the client and what resources they have internally. But we can assist with all of this.
Great. And Liz, I kind of wanted to pose the same question to you. At what point of an applicant's journey should they, pick up the phone or write you an email or reach out to Hub?
Yeah, really, once you're starting the application process to get that bond locked in, once you have financials, that's first. When you have the real estate, when you know where you're gonna pretty much set up your real estate as well, start quoting those, because like I said, the property market is right now, it's pretty much in a standstill. So if you're anywhere coastal, we need to get out to market pretty quickly. So once you have the real estate, once you need to have that bond, that application ready to submit, that's really when we would start talking. Once that's approved and the real estate's lease is signed and everything's ready to go, that's when we would pretty much activate everything. But yeah, and once, also the employees too, once you reach that over 3, then the workers' comp would kick in. So pretty much at the beginning of, once you have like a business plan and you're ready to go, is when we would want to look at the risk and analyze everything and quote out your coverages.
Awesome. And then Dave, I just kind of wanted to float that over to you as well. When should applicants really, start reaching out to someone like you or Young American Capital?
Well, you're going to have the Chase Capital, and that's probably going to come from your network, friends and family. Not too many bankers will get involved in a pre-application type of financing. And that's a very difficult hump to get over. But most family offices, most hedge funds, most people that invest in cannabis it's a risky enough space to be investing in to begin with. Trying to invest in a pre-license type of, there are people that do it very successfully, but you have to offer a decent percentage of your cap table for somebody who's willing to invest in a pre-license round. I mean, licenses trade just for the piece of paper around 35 million, 25 million, 25 to 35 million in that range over the last couple of years, just for basically the piece of paper. So you have to think about what you're going to offer your pre-licensed investor as a return, and I think that's got to be a 5 to 10 bagger just to make that attractive. Once you get the application in and stuff, again, very difficult time to start raising money. You've got to have a very good network and founding investors who are with you, because you're going to have to get control of real estate and a lot of things like that you're going to have to carry for quite a while. And until you get notice of intent to award, it's a very difficult process to raise money with any investment bank trying to tap the institutional markets. It's really going to have to be who you know and high net worth individuals in your network, that type of thing. And that's just getting out there, word of mouth marketing. So in that respect, the earlier you start making those calls and figuring out who could possibly be one of your supporters, the better. There's no time that's too early to start that process.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate that insight. And Florida is not for the faint of heart. If this is your first foray into cannabis, if you never ran a cannabis operation before, I would not start with the state of Florida. Part of this application process involves attesting to your cannabis experience, whether that's from dispensing, processing, or cultivating or security. They want to see what type of experience that you've had in dealing with growing the plant, processing, and dispensing the plant. So yeah, great information, Dave. Appreciate that. In terms of, I guess, an attorney on when they should probably be on board, that kind of starts just with the corporate formation of this entity, right? So in Florida, you wouldn't just be able to go on SunBiz and create a corporation and then have that corporation, be the applicant. In Florida, you have to have a business that has been in operation for about 5 consecutive years. So for a lot of people, they don't have Incs or LLCs or entities that are just collecting dust and they're renewing year after year after year. So, that could be a mitigating factor that you need to consider early out and on the onset of, what that looks like, as well as, whether or not you're going to move forward with funneling everything through, one entity or divvying it up. Is your real estate portfolio going to be held by someone else? Are you going to be contracting out to a vendor for all operations via a master services agreement, managed services agreement? So essentially, there's a lot of considerations that need to come into play. And the earlier you get legal counsel involved, the better. And of course, worst comes to worst, you need to get them involved when you don't win, because that's the only shot you have at actually trying to get a license, whether that's via settlement. And not only that, there's also teams of lobbyists that also could help you in kind of nearing that last 5-yard line and actually getting a license, doing their work in Tallahassee and setting up meetings with agency employees, trying to get the insight on what's happening. And that's, something that we've experienced thus far, right? We recently had one notice of intent to award to one of the 12 Pigford applicants. However, essentially there was 11 intents to deny, and everyone already had admin counsel or regulatory counsel in place. And for those of them that didn't, it was a rush to kind of get those admin counsels in place, and a lot of them were conflicted out. So the earlier you prepare, the cream of the crop, you'll be able to make your selection from in terms of consultants or attorneys or bankers or brokers or accountants. So it's vitally important that you have the preparation and the plan in mind, and it all really just starts. I think David put it eloquently, your network, and try to expand from there. So with that, I think we have 15 minutes left, but before we get to Q&A, I kind of just wanted to open up to the group before we get into Q&A. Is there any last thoughts that you'd like to provide our audience today concerning, how to apply for a license, what they need, pitfalls, just some added last 2 cents before we go to Q&A?
This is going to be somewhat repetitive, but every question on that application is worth a certain amount of points, and every question is kind of like a hill to die on. You've got to just tackle every single question the way as much as possible, as much as you can do. Don't blow off any single question or underestimate. Vijay talked about how close the scoring was in the last round, and how easy to see that every single the winning application knocked it out of the park on just about every single question. And then we kind of didn't get to the lobbying part till the end, but Vijay brought up a very important person to have a very important arrow in your quiver, I guess, is the lobbying part. No surprise that Florida is a lot about that part of the process, and so definitely picking the right lobbyist is huge. That's what I would add. That Skip.
Vijay, I'd like to also add, you brought up an excellent point regarding the entity setup. And it's a great point, because you're right. This is, you set this company up 5 years ago, and maybe you didn't have the right advisors at the time, or you maybe didn't put much thought to the structure you were setting up at the time. Well, now is the time to revisit that. And you can change the structure, because what you had set up initially may not necessarily be the best structure for you. There's a lot that has happened over the last 5 years. There's a new tax act that was passed. the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in 2018. So there are things that have changed where the structure you set up may not necessarily be the best structure going forward, and you could change that, and to do that, you need time. So it is a good time to meet with your advisors and review that to make sure that going forward, you're properly set up.
I wanted to piggyback off what Caesar said. It is also super important to reevaluate your insurance policies as you open your dispensaries, make sure those are added correctly. There's a lot of exclusions on these insurance policies. It's important to have someone, risk manager, really look at it and look at these exclusions and point out these exclusions because, like I said, the insurance market for cannabis is so new and these policies are changing every year with every different lawsuit that comes into play. There are exclusions on there that are bogus. So it's really important to have someone that really understands them and is looking at them. And at renewal, make sure make your revenues are up to date, your employee counts up to date, all your dispensaries are on there. If you have extraction machines that you may have leased or bought, make sure that those are properly covered. Those are pretty expensive. Workers' comp as well. Any liability issue can really be a catastrophic loss. I'm talking, millions. So it's you can always replace property, but liability claims are pretty up there. So it's also important to pretty much review those as well.
Great points. And I think I'll just add that, when you are building your team, whether it's yourself, your investors, any interest holders, managers, controllers, you need to vet them because, they could either make or break your application and, they could break it in a bad way and you wouldn't necessarily find out until the very last second. In Florida, everyone needs to do, owners and managers, and eventually when you get your licensed employees, they all need to pass a level 2 background screening. So you need to ensure that whoever that you're going to partner with, that they have the ability to pass that level 2 background screening. You don't want to get too far down the road and then have something unfavorable get uncovered, when you're about to either submit, or worst comes to worst, you submit and then comes out that there was a situation or a felony or what have you that has deemed that individual disqualified, and then you ineligible to receive a license. So with that, I think I want to go ahead and turn it over to some questions and answers. Todd, Rob, do we have any Q&A from the audience members in person or anything online? Let's see what we have here. Brian has asked, when assembling a proposal to help attract investors or partners in this space, what level of emphasis is useful to show regarding a company's compliance, SOPs, and IP brand management?
I'll take a stab, I guess, at part of that. So for investors, you're going to be probably working from a deck. So first of all, your management team, all the bios, all that stuff's got to be in there and tight. Compliance SOPs, I mean, you need to check all the boxes for compliance. I don't know how much of that I would go into in an investor deck. If you show your org chart, who your compliance person is, you can obviously talk about that. IP and brand management, brand strategy is a huge thing. To the extent that you can differentiate that in your deck, I think there's no reason not to spend a decent amount of time on that. I mean, Florida is a crowded market, a competitive market with a bunch of very large operators. So spending some time on how you're going to differentiate yourself in that very difficult and competitive environment would be important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree that if you are trying to attract any type of partners or investors who have any credibility in the space, they don't necessarily need to see your step-by-step provisions on how to extract crude, they really just want to see who's overseeing it. What is the compliance team? Who is it all reporting under, and how's that department getting managed? Not necessarily give them the SOPs. And I mean, when we talk about IP and trade secrets, SOPs falls right into that corner in terms of what a trade secret or IP could theoretically consist of. So you want to ensure that you have proper NDAs in place before you divulge all this documentation. NDA meaning non-disclosure agreement. In terms of your IP and brand management, that's vitally important as well. You have to really consider whether or not you're going to be contracting out in terms of signing licensing agreements with established brands, and then importing all of those SOPs that they provide for quality assurance and quality control, or whether or not you're going to take a stab at building your own in-house brands, and what that looks like. And everyone loves brands. People have thrown out thesis in cannabis that brands are the future. It's going to emulate somewhat of the alcohol environment where you don't necessarily buy vodka, but you ask for Tito's, right? So individuals believe cannabis, a lot of them believe cannabis is going down that path, but brands are very expensive to build. It's not cheap to build a brand. So essentially, when you're trying to show that to an investor, that has to kind of be taken into account as well. Let's see, Eric Rogers from SR Construction. Hey, Eric. Eric asked, is infrastructure forecasting to reflect recreational use being actively advised by David, Caesar, or Vijay on the application? So infrastructure forecasting to reflect recreational use being actively advised. I think we touched on that too, right? David, I think you mentioned that, I believe, in terms of, or was it someone else, of building dispensaries that have that recreational adult use aesthetic?
I'm not sure what he means by infrastructure forecasting. I think his previous question was about the aspect of building for rec use. I think it's a very overlooked point by those entering the Florida market, or scared to enter the Florida market. Everybody looks at the large incumbents and kind of shies away from it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's just a huge opportunity, if you have the money, I mean, it all comes down to capital, to really gear your footprint towards recreational use. And I think it could be a huge differentiator. The customer experience in the stores, it's been a medical market, so no surprise, but all the medical stores tend to look alike, tend to have a similar footprint. And there are a few operators out there that have larger footprints, better shopping experience, and are ready for rec, but a lot of them aren't.
Okay, great. Infrastructure forecasting. I imagine, I'm just going to assume that it means you're trying to plan out where you're going to set your dispensaries or retail sites. I guess when you are planning that out and you're strategically trying to implement which one is going to be your first, second, or third, you don't want to necessarily, well, maybe you could, I'm thinking you don't necessarily want to aggregate it all in one geographic area within the state. Considering that you are vertically integrated, you would have to set out some type of delivery infrastructure, as well as delivery infrastructure and delivery plan is part of the application. You would probably want to have it segmented out. So, one is in South, one is in Central, and, eventually you would also want to have it there at the Panhandle, doing, routes from Central Florida to all the way to the Panhandle. That can be tedious and arduous for your employees making those trips, to and from. especially considering DOT restrictions on the number of hours individuals can drive at one time, right? So you don't want them staying somewhere too long with a bunch of product in the car. So, when you're thinking about your infrastructure for dispensaries, that also needs to be taken into account too. Where are you going to have, I guess, your hub and spoke model? What does that look like? So it looks like.
And Eric's question, I think really, we missed the end of it. How much do you want to emphasize that on the application, I think is what his question is. Obviously get scored, or I believe a little bit. Vijay, you would probably be more knowledgeable about that on the black farmer license. Was there actual extra points for pointing out, or points talking about your strategy for infrastructure?
Absolutely. Infrastructure touches on all aspects of this application. Not only do you need a plan, but you need to set forth what that infrastructure looked like. And it's not necessarily, when I say infrastructure, it's not necessarily, the facilities involved in that. It's the actual, execution and meat and bones behind that. What does that look like? It has to be very detailed and nuanced to give the department some type of solace to know that once they do award a license, how fast can you step on the gas? Do you have the pieces, the puzzle pieces in place to actually move forward when you get it? Because the last thing they want to do is give it to someone, and that someone sits on it and entertains offers with Dave to sell, right? Not saying that you couldn't do that, but their main priority is really putting medicines in patients' hand at this point. So with that, I think that kind of wraps up any type of questions, unless we have something from the audience, which I don't think we do, or at least I can't see. And it is just about that time, 8 o'clock. So I would just want to thank C-Lab again for hosting this panel. I want to thank all of those who attended in person at American Social. We will all see you at the next one. And until then, take care, have a great night. And thank you to my panelists for all your expert insight.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Vijay. Cheers to everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a great evening.
Good night.
Night.